Once I told my grandmother Fern I didn't know where to start looking at all the delicious food. She said to eat dessert first because life is uncertain. And in that spirit, we'll start the recap of our Thanksgiving meal with pie.
This is Yeti at Large, a channel focused on making the most out of what you got, no matter where you're at. Now that you're here, let's go.
And all good pie starts with a pie paste. I know most people call it pie dough, but if you think about it, you're making a paste. So, we're scaling out our ingredients, and if you're questioning the even arm balance scale, look at some of our other videos. We have a lot of information on it. But we do everything by weight if we can at Yeti at Large. Here's the recipe for the pie dough. The secret here is to keep everything cold. Your flour cold, your eggs cold, the water cold, and the bowl cold. Because you want the fat globules to be encapsulated by the flour and the protein of the egg. We're going to start by mixing up our streusel topping for our Dutch apple pies. There's my streusel topping. And remember, I always use unsalted butter in all my baking recipes. And my secret weapon is almond paste. If you're not using it, you should be. Don't be afraid to give it a go. A good streusel topping is barely mixed. Now that that's done, we'll set it aside. I'm cutting up my very cold butter and rolling it in a little bit of the flour from the pie dough to make it as easy as possible to mix that in. Now, this handheld cutter is designed to cut the butter into smallest possible gravel-sized cubes and have it surrounded by the flour. That's what makes a very flaky pie crust. For the record, this thing was straight when I started. I'm thinking next year, I'll go the other direction and maybe it'll straighten it out. Now that we have our cold granulated butter and our flour and our salt, let's add our cold eggs. Now typically I'll strain the eggs, but in this case I knew for a fact I didn't get any shells in there. Now notice how I'm scraping along the edge and across the bottom to gently fold in the egg and ice water mixture to make that pie paste. And that's all, you just push it together. Now, my rolling pin is a handleless rolling pin, but you can see it's perfectly straight. I don't like those tapered pins. Good piece of birch. I have an ice cold piece of marble. I know for a fact how much pie dough it takes to make one pie shell, so I weigh it out and have very, very little trim. The trim I use to roll out some treats with cinnamon and sugar after the fact. See how I use the rolling pin like a hammer to clean up those broken edges? That way I know I can get a perfectly round piece of dough. I never go more than halfway rolling it from the center, and I'm constantly turning. So there's my scrap. There's a good size of the pie dough on my chilled pie plate. And I'll start to relieve the tension. I'm not trying to stretch the dough. I'm actually trying to shrink it back down. Here, I'm folding that top edge underneath itself and placing it where it'll be hidden so the edge of the pie is just beautiful. Here's the pinch method. Thumb and finger, and give it a good squeeze. Let's go. That's regular speed, by the way. I'm just that fast. Little crack there. I'll fix that. Those go into the fridge to rest up. We're going to start with a Dutch apple pie. These are apples from my sister's trees in Payson, and they had a little bit of juice on them, so I dried them up in a warm oven. Never drain your fruit. Always dry it. Here's the pie filling mixture I use for my fruit pie. It's like a dust. I triple sift it, and then I gently add it to my fruit, eyeballing how much I need. Just because that's the recipe amount, each pie is going to be different to how much of the dust it's going to need. I'm just looking to see that they're evenly coated. There's not too much, not too little, and I'm picking up a little in the bottom. When I've got that all done, after gently folding it together, I'll add my melted butter, and then I'll scoop it into my pie shells. Now I try not to pack this too tight, but I do leave a little edge around the flute on the rim of the pie so that it can catch the streusel topping. Man, a good Dutch apple pie is where it's at. You can see how the pie dust is pulling some of the moisture out of the apples, so if I hadn't dried those out in the oven, it'd be really wet and soupy right now. I made a mistake baking these. I should have put them on the bottom shelf with some little foil baskets. They dripped over a little bit onto the pumpkin pie. Nothing major, but next time I'll put them on the bottom shelf, not the top. You'll see that in a minute. So we portion this out. I'm pretty sure we're going to have a good amount. Man, go huge, go big, and leave nothing for the dishwasher. Here's my streusel topping, gently crumbled together, and just laid onto that. Little trick that I'll do once I get it on there is I'll hit it with a little canola pan spray and then a little cinnamon and sugar on top, because more sugar. Those are ready for the oven though at this point, and they take so much longer than the pumpkin pie. We're going to start with those. Learn to talk lately. So we get plenty of space in there and plenty of room for them to breathe. And let's get started on the pumpkin pie. I'm going to put them in for 350 for an hour, but they ended up baking about an hour 45 till I had a good tan on the bottom of the glass pie plate. But I bet you I can get my pumpkin pies done in time. Now, here's my secret weapon, the Libby's recipe. It's the best. It's what I use. I'm not sponsored or endorsed. You make your own choices. But the trick with the Libby's recipe is to not activate the starch in the pumpkin. So I sift together the dry ingredients, I add the eggs, and I get a good whip on those. I'm trying to get that sugar to start melting a little bit. It won't melt completely with just spices, cinnamon, and salt. I'll add my pumpkin from the can and gently fold across the side, across the bottom, and up the other side, not heavily whipping it. I don't want to work that starch out. So I fold it in as gentle as I can. That's disgusting. And I'll pour in the milk one can at a time. I have this giant can opener. It's really cool. And same thing, I'll just fold it in gently. I don't want to work those starches out. I let that sit for several minutes till the sugar fully melts. I check it by picking up a little drizzle and pinching it to see if I can feel sugar in there. Once that sugar's fully melted, I will evenly portion it out the best that I can, starting a little low and working my way around. These are giant pie shells and they're super tall the way I fold that dough. But what you make up for in the number of pies, you can do in the height. I cut my pie by 10 or 12 at the table, and you still get a good portion. Leaving plenty of room, and I got this small one here in a metal container. That one went to the neighbors, so they would have some fresh pumpkin pie. And about an hour and 10 minutes later, they're coming out. See how they lift right out of the oven compared to how they fall after they've been out of the oven for a few minutes. What I'm looking for isn't a toothpick or anything like that or a timer. I'm just checking that jiggle to see if the egg is fully cooked. And if you're at 170 to 180 degrees internal temperature in the center, that egg is fully cooked. So we're sitting down to eat. We got banana bread, mom's honey butter. I've got homegrown shallot gravy, cherry cranberries, California wine. We got mom, my sister, the dogs, our kids, my sweetheart, and a lot of good food. Our second video will load up with all the savory parts of this, but for now, let's just enjoy some pie. I really appreciate you guys coming along. Yeti at Large is the hide-and-seek world champ undefeated.